Okay. I just want to welcome everybody. Thanks for being here for the first of our three sessions with Bex on governance and leadership in the Torah. It's so I just want to say a topic that I have thought a lot about, and Rabbi Eddie Feinstein from Valley Beth Shalom gives also a wonderful series of lectures, different than Beck's, looking at Moses and different kings. So I think this is sort of the beginning of a much sort of larger compendium of how we can learn about what our values in leadership would be, what we draw from the people in the Torah that define our foundation, starting with God. So it's a very exciting opportunity, and I'm going to turn this over to Bex, and here we go.
All right. Hello, everybody. I'm Bex. I'm so excited to see you all. So excited to learn this with you. My official title is long and a mouthful, and I'll give it to you just in case you were wondering what I would put on a business card if it fit. And that is, I'm the North American faculty in residence for the conservative yeshiva at the Fuchsberg Jerusalem Center. And what that means is I get to teach all sorts of fun Tanakh-based stuff for one of the best institutions on earth, if you ask me, which is the Fuchsberg Jerusalem Center. We do a ton of adult learning, and we are based in Jerusalem. You should come visit us, especially now, especially this summer. We've got a 3-week program for adults. Come check us out. All right, and without further ado, we will get started. I'm going to talk at you for not a couple of minutes, and then I'll share the source sheet, and we're going to make sense of these sources together, getting at the idea of how God governs, how God functions as leader, and why that matters for us. So we've got an hour. We're doing 2 parts. First part is creation as governance and leadership. Second part is covenant as governance and leadership. It's kind of weird to look at creation and say, okay, how is God governing here? How is God leading here, right? Like, God's creating the world. Why that isn't obviously an act of governing. But as you'll see in a minute, when we read Genesis 1 through the lens of this is governing, it unveils all sorts of insights for us into what it means to govern, what our relationship ought to be, particularly because, as you all probably know, the way Genesis 1 ends is with the creation of humankind in the image of God. And humankind, Adam, is told to rule over everything else on earth and the earth itself, because humankind was created in the image of God. And so that verse is the key that allows us to go back and say, okay, let's read Genesis 1 carefully and see what God is doing. What does it mean to rule in God's image? What clues has God given us so far as to what it means to rule, what it means to govern, how we ought to lead? So we will get started. I have a source sheet I'm going to share in the chat with you all. And right now we've got a ton of people hiding off screen, and this is the kind of class where you want to talk. I need you to talk because I want to know what you have to say. Your ideas are more interesting than mine. I've been stuck with mine all my life. Hello, Alan. So source sheet is in the chat. If you're hiding off screen, come on, turn your video on, and we're going to start reading this together. One disclaimer: there's a lot of creation story in the Tanakh. We are only going to be looking closely at a small section of Genesis 1. We're going to be pretty much completely ignoring Genesis 2, 3, and 4, which is the Garden of Eden creation story. If we had world enough and time, we would do it, but today we'll focus just on the Genesis 1 creation. Tov. So everyone have access to the source sheet there? You see the source sheet? Cool. All right. So we're going to start with a quote from Yitzhak Benyamini, who is brilliant and completely bizarre. If you're ever looking for the sort of book that will blow your mind, with all sorts of really incredible insights, but also like lead you with a word salad, look up this guy's book, Critical Theology of Genesis. Really good. So he starts, and I'm going to read this quote out loud to you, and I'm going to pause for a second to see if anybody has a reaction, whether this resonates, whether this doesn't resonate, how you might interpret this quote that I'm going to read to you in light of governance, in light of leadership. Why am I bringing this quote? What does this quote have to do with the topic today? So the quote is, creation is not ex nihilo, is not from nothing, but from confusion, from chaos. The moment of creation is the moment of establishment of God as separate from chaos and as its organizer. All right. Yeah, it's a good quote, eh? So tell me, what's going on? What is this quote saying? How do you reconcile this quote with the idea of governance, with the idea of leadership? Why, how's this quote inviting you to read Genesis 1? Yeah, Sylvia, start us off. Wait, also, before you start, caveat, I'm so excited to hear you all talk. When you're all talking, you're telling me your point in like 3 sentences max and getting out. Don't want to hear your dissertations. I want your dissertations in written form submitted to me by next Monday. Yes.
But we might have 2 weeks, actually. It's actually what he's saying is that creation is not, I mean, that everything actually existed before the minute of actual creation. It all existed. God just said, okay, let's organize it now.
Interesting. Okay. Alan, add to that.
God prefers order to chaos.
Great. Okay. So the world or something already existed, but the thing that existed was chaos, and what God did was create order. Okay. Keep pushing that. What does that have to do with governance? What does that have to do with leadership? Why is that? I mean, obviously because there's something about structuring order that is what governing is. But push that. Why? What does that do? Why does that matter? How do you understand creating order in relationship to governance, creation in relation to governance? I'm going to let Alan talk again, but I see all of you hiding there and I want to hear you too. Alan, go for it.
Well, if you connect the dots, there's the snide comment that comes in a couple chapters later about the Yetzer being Ra, that we're born with a Yetzer Ra. At that point, doesn't talk about Yetzer Hatov. That's what the double Yud drash by Yetzer is created to say. Well, there's a Yetzer Tov too, but then we have the comment from the recurrent comment in the Book of Judges that every man did what they wanted, and that didn't turn out very well.
Great. Okay. So Alan, love what you're doing. You're jumping us all around. We've got the in a couple of chapters at the end of the flood story, God says, okay, man's heart is evil from his youth, right? And it's this idea that like something about humankind is naturally evil. And when humans follow their own inclinations, as in the Book of Judges, when every man does what's right in his own eyes, then we get back to a state of chaos almost. So there's something about like the natural state perhaps is chaos, and what God's job is, what God's purpose is, the reason God exists is to create order out of chaos. Okay. Corinne.
Yes, hi, Rex and everyone. Two things come to my mind. Separation is like, as for Shabbat and Havdalah, there needs to be a separation from what is holy from the profane. And when it comes to Pesach, the Seder, it's an ordered service. Like God had, um, for liberation and redemption to happen, there had to be that process of leaving Egypt, going through all this ordeal, and going to Sinai, um, receiving the laws, etc., and transgressing. But it's all had to go through a certain process. So I believe there is some kind of connection between separating and orderly creation.
Oh, awesome. Okay, okay. So that it's not just this moment of creation that is creating order out of chaos. It's literally every single thing that happens afterwards is the plot of the Tanakh, the plot of the Torah, of the Bible, is the plot of creating order from chaos over and over again in more and more specific ways, perhaps, that, and Corinne, I'm sort of putting words in your mouth, but that like get us to the point of last week's parasha, that get us to the point of the creation of law on Mount Sinai, or the revelation of law on Mount Sinai. Incredible. Okay.
Yes, yes.
Anat, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I wanted to say that I don't think that men were born evil. I think that the leader or the one that's in charge is supposed to put balance, because everything that can be considered bad, even something good, if there's too much of it. So the balance and the order is what the leader is supposed to do, so that everyone can live in harmony.
Interesting. Okay, awesome. And that we're revealing this like real tension, and we'll jump to the text in just a minute to get at it. But this real tension between like what exists without God's governance. Is it chaos, and where is human in that? Is human part of the chaos, or is human the antidote to chaos? And just the quote that Alan had brought, that Anat you're referencing, is this quote at the end of the flood where God says, okay, human is evil from his youth. Man is evil from his youth. And it's one of the most like chutzpahdik quotes you've ever heard. God just destroyed everything. God just committed mass horrible murder of animals, of people, of the earth itself. And then God says, I know it's man who's evil. You're like, excuse me, take a look in the mirror. So, all right. We had one more comment from Marcia. Oh, Marcia Lane, nice to see you. Marcia Lane said, if creation is out of chaos, then the organizer is the governing force. Yefé. Okay. So just what that means is like the example God is providing to us of what it means to rule is what it means to is ruling is organizing. They are almost synonymous, which is kind of interesting. Makes me more interested in like learning about, what's her name? Maria Kondo. Is that right?
Oh, yes. Yes.
Right.
You said it better than I could have, Bex. Thank you.
Thank you, Marja. All right, so we're going to jump to the text now. If you've come in recently and don't have the source sheet, I just shared the source sheet in the chat again. Facebook people, you don't have the source sheet, but maybe whoever's, Marcia, if you're running the Facebook, maybe you could share the source sheet with them. And we're going to read this very first box on the source sheet, Genesis 1, verses 1 and 2. We've been talking, using this Binyamini quote, about like chaos existed first and then God created. We're going to read Genesis 1 and 2, Genesis 1 verses 1 and 2 trying to get at that idea of like, so what is existing? Where is God? What is God? What is existing in this moment of creation, or this moment just before creation? And what I'm trying to get at here is like, who's governing and what is being governed? Is God, like in the US government, we talk about government of the people, by the people, and for the people, that there's something really powerful in the idea that we govern ourselves, but we're still one nation under God. And that who was it who not I think somebody just mentioned Revelation at Sinai, when we get laws from God, but we are once again responsible for setting up our own judges, our own system, so that it's government of, by, and for the people. My question as we read these first two verses of Genesis is like, who's governing and who is being governed? Is God different from everything else? Is God necessarily separate from everything else? What is the relationship between governed and the one governing? That makes sense? Cool. Marcia, are you? Yeah, you came out of hiding. Will you chant for us? Oh, make sure you unmute.
Did you mean me or did you mean
No,
you mean other
Marcia.
Marcia?
Yeah.
Oh, and just so you know, Bex,
Yeah.
the other, it's Marcia and Marcia, and we're both chanters. And actually, I'd like to invite Marcia to actually chant Bereshit if she would. She's wonderful.
All right, now I have to actually put it back up on my screen. Hang on a sec. Well, I can certainly do the first verse from memory. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz ve'haaretz hayta tohu vavohu v'choshech al pnei tehom v'ruach Elohim mirachefet al pnei hamayim.
Amen, Marcia. Thank you. Wow. All right. So, question: what is this thing that exists in the moment of creation, or in the moment before creation? Is God separate or different from everything else, from the tohu vavohu, the vast void, the chaos? What is, if we're trying to like list the actors, and one of them's going to be the organizer and one of them's going to be the organized, how do you understand who's organizing and who's organizer? What is God's relationship to all of this stuff, to the tohu vavohu, to the vast and the void, to the chaos? Are they already separate? What's going on? Yeah, Marcia.
Well, I've always imagined that a clue to that is the word hovering.
Okay.
Meaning when you hover, you're not a part of, you're imposing yourself upon, but you're not in. That's at least how I understand that word. I don't know if the Hebrew root actually implies how we understand that.
Okay. So we've got something really cool, like visually here, right? With like who's on top of what. And some of you have learned biblical parallelism with me before. That we have this parallel here that's kind of, I don't know, scary when you look at it. We've got two things on top of two other things, right? We've got the choshek al pnei tehom, the darkness on top of the face of the depths. And we've got the ruach of Elohim, the spirit or the wind of God, which is the thing hovering on the face of the waters. So darkness and God are paralleled there.
Interesting. By the way, Nat has her hand raised. I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah. Thank you. Both of them, both darkness and God are like somehow on top of something else. And that maybe that means that there's somehow already separation, as Marcia's saying, that that God is separate because God is hovering. God is not part of whatever the vast void depth is. Anat, go for it.
When I read the Hebrew, it could be interpreted as there was someone above God, and he has created God and all the rest of Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. First, he, whoever it is, created God, and then the earth and whatever else. So if that's correct, then God and everything else are on the same level as being part of a creation that will be separated from each other. But that means that is someone that is above God and created God.
Yife. Okay, awesome. And that, so we've got this interesting thing going on with verse 1, whether this is a title that describes the rest of the story, or whether this is a moment like in the story where creation happens, and now let me describe to you the process. And if creation happens, then somebody is doing that creation, and that in Anat's terms is this like pre-God God, or this bigger God, this like God is, for my Kabbalists out there, God is Ein Sof or something. God is as infinite, creating God as character. Okay. And so in Anat's version, we have in verse 2, God as something created, God as equal in some ways, or of equal valence to the darkness, to the Tahom, the vast void, to the Tohu Vavohu. Okay, interesting. Other thoughts? Yeah, Marcia.
So in what Anat was saying, is she implying that the words Ruach Elohim constitutes an existence that is other than Elohim? Because if Ruach Elohim is a separate thing from Elohim and not a function of Elohim, then that has like layers. Like you were saying, layers of who's on top. There's the water, and then Choshech is on the face of the water, and Ruach Elohim is hovering above that, and then maybe over that is Elohim. So maybe like we're talking about multiples here.
Okay, possible. And it's, I think Anat was saying in verse 1, we don't need to read Elohim as the same as like the thing that's doing the first creation can be bigger than, but Marcia, I love what you're doing with that.
But it implies that the word Bereshit doesn't mean in the beginning of.
Yeah, which we're not going to dive down that rabbit hole right now, but that is a very interesting rabbit hole to follow Alice down sometime. So okay. We got room for like 2 last thoughts about who's governing here and who's governed. What is is Elohim, is the Ruach of Elohim part of, like, equal to Tohu Vavohu and Tahom, to vast void, to Choshek, or all of these things that existed? Is God just one of these 4 things that existed in this moment of creation? Is there a power struggle here at all? Like, God's about to create. How does it happen that God becomes the one doing creation? How does it happen that we got 4 characters here, right? We've got the vast and the void, we've got the depth, we've got the darkness, and we've got God, or Ruach Elohim, the spirit, the wind of God. God's the one who's going to find a mouth and start speaking. Why? Like, how does that happen? Do we have 4 equals and one of them rises up and starts speaking? Alan.
I would consider the Ruach Elohim, the Ruach, as an interface, sort of like the cloud that we'll read about in Shemot.
Okay. Interfacing between whom and whom?
Between God and everything else.
Okay.
In Shemot, it's between God and us. Here, it's everything else.
Okay, Faye. So that works with what Anat was saying, what Marcia was elaborating. Then Elohim, maybe in verse 1, is God. And then in verse 2, we've got these 4 things, and Ruach Elohim is the way of that Elohim interfaces with Choshek and Tahom and all of that stuff. Interesting. All right, Anat?
Maybe God has, whoever, the one above God, whoever created from the beginning the materialistic things like the earth, the darkness, but also the spiritual thing that is the ruach, is part of the creation, but hasn't yet put it in anything specific.
Oh, very. Yeah, sorry, go on, Annette.
That's it.
Yafei. So there's something going back to the Binyamini quote about chaos, right? That verse 2 is describing chaos, is describing what existed before creation, and it is chaos. And Ruach Elohim is part of that chaos. That, I mean, Ruach Elohim meaning spirit of God or wind of God, but this is like this uncontained something, this God as scattered, this God as something that hovers, but that isn't yet turned into a being. Cool. Okay. Megan, you look like you're about, are you? No, okay. Oh, unmute. Megan? All right, well,
I had to wake up my mouse. They're not knowing the Hebrew as well as everybody else knows it. It's there's a certain flow to this that it doesn't really bother me whether there's one above this or that. It's not it doesn't, it's in the beginning Elohim created the heavens and earth because there was such chaos, and then it just flows, and there's a flow to that 1 and 2, and the spirit is hovering above. It's a image of the beginning before everything else gets created. I like it. So that's all I have to say. Yeah.
Okay, so there's this like anticipation possibility as well. Okay, cool. So we're going to take that into the next 3 verses, which is this moment of creation, this first creation. Question is, okay, if who put it at the beginning? Marcia, you said if creation is order out of chaos, then the organizer is the governing force. So looking at that idea, we're going to read these 3 verses where God starts creating, and say, okay, God's organizing. How does that work as governing? What does this mean? How is this an example of governance here? So, yeah, Marcia? No. Okay. Marcia, do you want to chant for us verses 3, 4, and 5?
Sure.
Thank you.
Vayomer Elohim yihi or vayhi or. Vayar Elohim et haor ki tov. Vayavdel Elohim bein haor uvein hachoshech. Vayikra Elohim laor yom v'lachoshech kara laila. Vayhi erev vayhi voker yom echad.
Amazing. Thank you, Marcia. And I'm going to read the translation just so we have it out loud as well. And Elohim said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And Elohim saw the light, that it was good. And Elohim separated the light from the darkness. And Elohim called the light day, and the darkness God called night. And there was evening, and there was morning one day. Okay. First act of governance. What, like, if you're taking this example and trying to derive like the laws of how to be a good ruler from this, what are they? What is God doing here? What does it mean to govern if this is governing? What does it mean to rule? What does it mean to lead if this is the example? What does one do when one governs? Sylvia, start us out, and then we'll go to Annette.
Thanks. You knew I was struggling to find my reactions button. It's there. Well, I think it's like he's made a judgment, he's made a decision. Let there be light. So he has to bring on light. And how he does that is to separate one from the other. Is it a value judgment? I don't know that from this reading, but I know that he wants light, so he's going to make it. So he has to make decisions, judgments.
Interesting. Okay. So first is the like decision that like something is needed. To govern is to know what needs to be done and then to do it. Like, okay. And the way it's getting done here is by an act of separation. Interesting. Okay. And that.
I think that the first thing that is written here is Vayomer.
Great.
Vayomar means that he spoke. So first he used his words and expressing yourself so that everyone can hear as a leader is very important. So everyone knows the intentions. And the other thing is he created light. And light, as we know from, for example, from Egypt, when one of the plagues was the plague of darkness, is light represents positivity, education, enlightenment, all the good things. So it all starts with positive. And he does separate between the positive and the negative, between what the darkness might represent in our culture that has so many, each one has his own idea. So I think that's the first thing he did.
Wow. Okay. So much you just said there. I'm gonna break it into three parts, and we're gonna start with the second thing you just said about the darkness. So we just had darkness in verse 2, right? We had all of this stuff in verse 2. We had the tohu vavohu, the vast and the void. We had the choshek, the darkness, and we had tahom, the watery depths. And so, like Sylvia had said, what God is doing as governor is making a decision, and not saying, okay, the decision is to make light, which is good, as opposed to darkness, which elsewhere gets read as bad. I want you to deepen that, y'all, anyone to deepen that a little bit with the fact that we've just been in this world of darkness, of depth, not death, and water. Yeah, Marcia.
When there's a crisis or total chaos, whether for whatever reason, no one really does have an answer. You on some level you have to use your seichel, you have to use your good sense, but any attempt at remedying that is a shot in the dark. And I think it's so incredible that God said, okay, I'm gonna take a stab at this, and I'm gonna say yehi or. Let's see what happens there. And he stood back, and God stood back and said, okay, let's see, by kitov, this worked. I'm going to keep moving in this direction. That was step one. But I think in what it's really showing is that God did not know that light was going to be the beginning of an answer. He threw it out there. It was like design thinking, exactly like he threw it against the wall and he said, let's try it. So interesting to me.
Oh, I love that, Marcia. Incredible. Okay, so that's Sylvia's God's what it means to govern is to make a decision and act. And here God is making a decision and acting, and maybe it's going to work and maybe it doesn't. And then like it worked and it's good and wow. And given that it worked, God is governor, God is ruler, is learning something and is going to keep doing it another 5 times, right? God is going to continue this pattern because God has learned that it works. God is going to continue the speech act creation thing.
I just want to say, but most of
yeah.
what's all interesting is that he observes what he does. It's,
Right.
I don't mean to use he, but God observes what God does in every day of creation and sort of I mean, we don't read it that way. We read it like this is just what happened. But if you think about it, each step, there is an assessment. And if for some reason the assessment had, the question is, how long did God assess? Was X, Y, or Z good? Birds, what? But it's very interesting, like in terms of what we learn about the decisions we each make. I'm sorry.
Incredible, Marcia. Okay, Marcia, 1 sec. So we've got this like just the process. What does it mean to govern? How do we learn how to govern from this? So far, we have like identify a problem, which is all this chaos, hoshek, darkness, vast void, whatever. Then make a decision you're going to do something about it and try it out, which is the God speech act. Let there be light. And then there's the evaluation. Okay, did what I just tried to do work? And God evaluates and God said, yes, that does work. And then having done that, there's, okay, what are my next steps? Okay, so that's what we've got so far. There's lots of coloring we can fill in, lots of shading. Marcia, keep going.
The only thing I wanted to say was that in the beginning of this story, there's dichotomy. So there's up and down, there's darkness and light, there's hard and there's solid and liquid. It seems to me that there are only 2 choices, but every single one of those steps is necessary for what's going to come later. So God doesn't say for God's first action, Yehi behemot, or it doesn't say let there be creatures, let there be plants. That can't happen. So that this orderly sequencing of attempts or of actions, each one builds on the previous one.
Yes.
You can't have step 3 without steps 1 and 2.
Really cool. Okay. So which is like to govern means you've got to do things in the right order. You've got to not, I don't know, not run before you can walk. You got to turn the lights on before you start writing the Constitution. And also I think, as Marcia was saying, like you've got to, having evaluated what you've just done, you're not done, right? You've got to keep going. That to govern doesn't mean you say, okay, I did the thing, or to lead isn't, I did the thing, and now I'm gonna like sit back and collect the votes. It's not, I fulfilled the campaign promise and now I'm finished. It's a continual process. Ife, and then Corinne.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say, I can say something that I'm not sure that is actually related, which is that the process of creation reminds me of the process of giving birth, because first the ubab, I forgot the word. Embryo. The embryo is in the darkness, is shielded, he's in the mother's womb, and then he comes out into the light. So it's the same process, but that's before he even created man, and the man that he created didn't come in the same way that we know that men do come. So it's interesting.
It's incredibly interesting in that, and I don't think you were here 2 years ago when I taught this text as where we were looking at this specifically as a birthing metaphor, but it works really well, particularly with mirachefet as a sexual act. But that is not what we're doing today. So If y'all have ways of relating that back to the idea of like birthing as an act of government, or mothering, parenting as an act of government, love to hear it. But let's focus on governance and leadership. Corinne.
Hi, 2 points that come to my mind is that Kabbalistic mystic point of Ein Sof and Tzimtzum, like God contracts, withdraws, or expands, and like light is there, darkness is there. They are not conflicting realities, but they are complementary, and there needs to be one for the other to exist in contrast. And in terms of leadership, I say that a leader needs to be present and give some directions, but at some point he needs or she needs to step back and let the people, let the others do their thing, come forward.
Interesting. Okay. So back to the system that Megan, Sylvia, and Marcia were setting up, where it's this do something, evaluate, and then take next steps. That at some point it's do something, evaluate, take next steps, and also self-evaluate. Say, okay, am I still the right one to be leading? Is there a point at which I need to designate a successor, or is there a point at which this should no longer be my job? Interesting. Okay. You've not mentioned this at the beginning. I want to come back to the idea of good and bad. We see that God says that when God evaluates, God says the light was good. Something really interesting about creation, as opposed to, let's say, the Ten Commandments, or opposed to many other ways we think of laws, that everything God does here in the creation story is positive, right? It's all God creates, God does this, and it's good. There's no do not, or there's no negation here. There's no do not kill, there's no do not this, there's no do not that, there's no God, destroying the light, the darkness, or anything. This is all positive acts of creation. Why might that be? Why, if this is like the model that we're getting first of how to govern, why is it all about positive and not about negative? Why is it all let there be this? Why is it creating structure, creating order, rather than like vanquishing, destroying chaos? That makes sense? Thoughts? Anybody? If you're hiding off screen, I can't see you. Sylvia.
Thanks. Well, it seems to me that considering the number of creation stories we have, prior to creation, we have destruction of the chaos or the bad. And so what I think that is implied is that God is trying to give us a view of what's good and what's organized, what's going to be great for us, rather than say, okay, don't do this, but I don't want you to know about it. Don't do this yet. I want you to know what all the good stuff is. You'll find the bad stuff later. You know what I mean? But that's what I think.
Interesting. So it's not to say that destruction doesn't happen, but the model, the story presents us here is of governing as creation, because that's what God wants us to learn how to do. That when God tells us to rule in my image, or rule in our image, God wants us to create rather than destroy. Okay. Crazy. Cool. Okay. Diane, Megan, Annette.
I think that God needs something or someone to react to. And these factors, these things, have not yet been created. So in order for something to, in essence, as it develops, to be, quotes, bad, there has to be God does something and there's a reaction, there's a counter.
I'm thinking of, I don't know if this is applicable at all, Ezer Kenegda, that there has to be something opposing or something else in the picture in order for those further judgments to be made.
Great. Okay. Really deep theological point you're making there, Diane. So that Diane's quoting what we find in the second creation story when God creates a helpmate for Adam, a helper against him or for him, and that there's something about, like, when you make a judgment, when you say something is good, you're sort of implying its opposite, right? That good can't exist without bad. And this is back to what Marcia was saying. Okay, God stops back and evaluates. Well, was it possible for God to say, no, that didn't work, that was bad? Is it like, when God is saying something is good, does that bring into the world also the idea of bad? Can we not understand the good without the bad? And it just so happens that God is really, really good at creating, at least in this story, that the reason this is all positive is because God is good at it. But when we create, we still have to, or when we govern, we still have to go through that same creative process. And when we evaluate, we might have to say, that was bad. That didn't work. Interesting. Okay. Megan, Anat, and then Anat.
I don't see here that the darkness was bad. It just was.
Okay.
And in order for creation to emerge, Elohim, God, had the idea of, let's put light here. And it came, and he said, that's good. But he didn't do away with the darkness. He didn't say the darkness is evil. He didn't say anything. He just made it was night. So he had two things that flowed with each other rather than good and bad. Now, good and bad comes later on with a lot of things when we're created. But right now, it just was. And I don't see the good bad part of it. I do see it later on when it's used in that way.
Fantastic. Well, so we definitely have the light as good, and we have the darkness as not light, but we are very purposely not calling the darkness bad, right? God sees the light as good. God separates light from darkness, and then God gives these two things names. God calls the light day and the darkness night, but God does not make a value or moral judgment towards the darkness the way that God does for the light.
It's everything light. Get rid of all of this bad darkness. He didn't do that. He just had a balance.
Okay. And there's something going on that God calls the light good, that it's the created thing is good, as opposed to the choshek, the darkness, which had already existed, which doesn't called good. But maybe that's because God has to evaluate what God's done, but God doesn't have to evaluate what's already existed. I don't know. All right. And then Susan, if that was a hand, if not, we'll keep going.
There are two things. The one is that as anyone that's trying to lead, you know that you can achieve much more when you have a positive approach. Okay. So I think it's just teaching us that that's the way to achieve more and to get more done, with a positive way of handling things. The second thing occurred to me is that a leader usually has to be the people or whoever he leads have to identify with him, either by the looks or by the thought or whatever. And Elohim, the name Elohim in Hebrew, has in it the male, the female, and the plural, which is actually, there isn't such a word in any other language, but it actually consists of every one of us and everything. So we can actually identify with Elohim and understand that he understands us. So when he brings laws or separate things or decides or shows us the way, we can understand that he understands it and would try and do it the best for us.
Interesting. Great. Okay. And so that's coming back to the idea of like who's governing and who's governed here, who's leading and who's being led. And not at the very beginning, you were talking about the Speech Act and like, well, so who's hearing God speak? And there's something about, okay, we have us implied here, or we have everything else implied here. Cool. And that's also we'll find in when God creates humans, God says, Naase Adam b'tselmenu. You say, God says, let us create humankind in our image. And you say, why is that plural? And maybe that's like the implied audience, the implied everything that's going to exist. All right, y'all. We're going to skip over this next box where humankind is created because we've been playing with it the whole time, right? The idea is, okay, why are we looking at Genesis 1 as an example of how to be a leader? Because God says, like, okay, I'm creating humans to rule. I'm creating humans in our image, right? So that's why we've been playing this game. The next box is on the second page. It's in Genesis 15, and it's about covenant. And so in 30 seconds, the history of the world, part 1, God creates the world as an act of government, as an act of organizing, creating structures, and then it doesn't work. We've got the flood, we've got murder, we've got all this mess, and we got the Tower of Babel. We've got a bunch of different times where chaos bursts through the structure, bursts through the order that God creates. And that happens from Genesis 1 through 11 until we get to the Abraham story. Now, with the Abraham story, God says, all right, I need another model. I need something besides creating the world over and over again that is going to be governed, is going to create order, is going to rule the world. And the thing that God tries, starting with Abraham, is the idea of brit, is the idea of covenant. So I'm, for the sake of time, in the English, going to read Genesis 15, 1 to 8 for you. And the question is, like, this is between God and Abraham. How does covenant work here? How does covenant work? How does brit work as a form of leadership or governance? Who's responsible to whom? What is happening here? How does this provide a model of leadership for us? We'll see, or if you read more of Genesis, you'll see that Abraham does make covenants with other people. This is something that doesn't just exist between God and human. It also exists going forward between human and human. All right, Genesis 15. After these things, the word of God was upon Abram in a vision, saying, do not fear, Abram, I am your shield. Your reward is very great. And Abram said, my Lord God, what will you give me? I go about childless, and the one who rules over my house is Demeshech Eleazar. And Abram said, behold, you have not given me offspring, and behold, the son of my house will be my heir. And behold, the word of God was upon him, saying, this one will not be your heir. Rather, the one who comes out from your loins will be your heir. And God took him outside and said, look now up at the heavens and count the stars. Are you able to count them? And God said to him, thus will be your offspring. And he had trust in God, and he accounted to him as righteous. And God said to him, I am God who brought you out of Ur-Kasdim to give this land to you to possess it. And Abraham said, my Lord God, how will I know that I will possess it? So it's a chunky, long conversation, right? Where it's not for another like 15 verses that we're going to get the word covenant. But what's going on in this conversation? How is Abraham the ruled one? Is God the ruler? What's going on here? How does this work as governance? What is God doing? And what, especially thinking about verse 6, focusing on verse 6 here, where Abraham trusted, and that's that amen word, believed, had faith in God, and then someone accounted it to the other one as tzedek, as righteousness, and it's unclear whether that's God accounting it to Abraham or Abraham accounting it to God. Sylvia.
First thing that I think of is this is a negotiation. God says, I'm going to do this for you. And Abraham says, yeah, but what about this? Or what can you do for me here? You know, what's my, you know, what am I getting out of this? All this stuff I'm about to do for you. What? You know, so, I mean, we always think that, of course, that God is the leader in this, but it seems like Abraham has agency and he gets to ask questions. And I mean, I don't know if he gets to make the decision that comes later, I think, but he certainly gets to have a say in what's about to happen.
Okay. So just like in Genesis 1, God is making the decision saying, okay, I'm going to try this out. But unlike Genesis 1, the ruled, the ones who are being governed, in this case, Abraham, gets to push back, and that changes things. The God is responsible to the governed here. Okay. Keep pushing it. What else? How does this work as a text that tells us something about governance and leadership? How do you make sense of verse 6? What do belief, trust, righteousness, what does any of that have to do with governance? What is the relationship between God and Abraham? Here, Marcia says it's relationship building, that in order to get to the point where you don't just have like God, or don't have the leader making decisions for everyone, you have to have a real like trust relationship between leader and follower, between governor and governed, and that relationship building comes in verse 7 a little bit, where God says, listen, like, I've been there for you before. You can trust me because I can refer you back to the time I told you I would do something for you, and I did. I've carried this out for you. And it's cool also, right? Because in verse 7, that language, I'm going to read it for you quickly in the Hebrew. God says, Ani Hashem asher chotziatecha me'or kasdim letet lecha et ha'eretz hazot berishta. That sounds a lot like the language we hear over and over again in Exodus, where God says, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt to bring you to the land. Only when we hear it in Exodus, it's God hasn't actually done it yet, right? And here God's saying, okay, I've done this for you, Abraham. I've already brought you out of Ur Kasdim. So it's building that relationship, building that trust, because we can say, okay, God has done it before and God will do it again. Cool. Okay, Marcia, what?
Well, I was just going to say that, you know, it's because Ani Adonai Elohecha asher hotzeiticha me'eretz Mitzrayim lihyot lahem leElohim. I am the Lord your God. That we what we say in every bracha every day, several times a day, is what you're saying now. God, it's when we make a sanctification blessing, we're actually quoting this and reminding ourselves that God. I mean, I know it's obvious, but I'm just saying, like, looking at it from this lens is so interesting that a million times a day, like today in 2024, we do that. It's so, as God is our ultimate ruler.
Amazing. All right. I'm going to close because we're technically out of time, and not put your comment in the chat so that we can read it. Okay. So we've been looking at God as leader, as governor, because we have those verses where God says, all right, humans, you need to rule, and the way you're going to rule is in my likeness. What we've come up with is saying, okay, what does it mean to rule in God's likeness? It means that you don't necessarily know what you're doing, but that you gotta say, okay, I'm going to try. I'm going to try on 6 consecutive days. I'm going to try something new every time. I'm going to stop once I've tried and evaluate the thing I've done. I'm going to look at it and say, okay, is this good? It's good. Great. I'm going to keep going. To govern also means to say, okay, I'm going to look for the positive. And I know it's important to present what I'm doing as positive. even if what I'm doing has negative connotations. I still need to like view the glass as half full rather than half empty. It means to say, okay, once I get to the point where I have real people I'm leading, I'm not doing this in a vacuum. I'm doing this to gain the trust of the people I'm ruling. The way I gain their trust is by saying, okay, I will do something, and then I do it. Is by carrying through on what I've promised, and also by accepting feedback with humility, saying, okay, when they have doubts, it's not because there's something wrong with them. It's because there's something either wrong with me or the way I've communicated. There's something really cool in this Genesis 15 passage where God is rephrasing, right? God's saying, okay, let me explain to you if you haven't understood to this point.
I just want to step in twice.
yeah.
There's two other things that are ever present here in terms of, first of all, God is doing God's own PR. When he gets questions from Abraham, he says, wait a minute, let me remind you, this is what I did. I already did that for you. You can have, you should be trusting in me, meaning that every leader still has to do their own PR and do it well. And number two, the whole idea going back to creating human beings so that there was layers of leadership. I mean, back to Genesis, day 6 and whatnot. By the way, it failed. That was a failed experiment. But with layers of leadership, one person can't do it all. So I think there's many lessons in governance that comes from the passages that you put in today. I mean,
fantastic. Yeah, there's so much more going on here. We will meet next week and be looking again at Abraham, but this time we will be looking at Abraham as a leader, particularly the ways in which he chooses not to be a king. We'll be referring back to the stuff we've created this time, thinking about, okay, is God king? Is God providing an example for Abraham that is also anti-king? I thank you so much. Yeah.
I have two announcements. If you have to go, one, next week, Kavod finishes his series on Neo-Hasidism. Bex will be back for the last 2 weeks in February. And then we have a new scholar coming in early March. Rabbi Mike Myman will be looking at an interesting look at the history of Eretz Yisrael in biblical times. I also just want to say, if any of you are interested, I'm working with Cantor Matt Austerklein. Many of you remember his teachings, a wonderful guy who's getting his PhD in musicology. We're leading a trip to Great Britain to look at basically 400 years of Jewish history in Great Britain through culture and sacred music. So if you're a traveler and you're interested in joining us, we'd love to have you. And all that information is on our website, jewishcollaborativeoc.org. Thank you to everybody for being here, for supporting this program, and we'll look forward to seeing you either next week or the week after. Thank you, Bex. Wonderful class.
Thank you all.